This is the 5-Minute Podcast Review for Friday, January 20, 2017. Now, podcasting usually gets a surge of new listeners at the start of each year. People who have received new phones as gifts, or people who have taken time over the holidays to finally work out or maybe be shown by family members how to listen to podcasts. I've noticed a bit of an upsurge in subscribers in the last couple of weeks, and it's a fair guess that at least some of you are new to podcast listening. So I'm going to bang through 5 must-have podcasts that you should subscribe to get yourself up and running. And to make it super easy, the links to all the podcasts are on your screen. Now, veteran podcast listeners will almost certainly know these 5 podcasts, although I'm always surprised. Just the other day, I mentioned Serial to someone who I know is a podcast listener, and they hadn't heard of it. So on that note, let's start with Serial. The Serial podcast broke records for number of downloads and is credited with bringing hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of new listeners to podcasting. And just to clarify, there are 2 seasons of Serial, but we're talking here about season 1. When people talk about the Serial podcast, they're almost always talking about season 1. So Serial season 1 is made up of 12 episodes and takes a deep dive into the murder of Hae Min Lee, an 18-year-old student from Baltimore in the US. Hae Min Lee's ex-boyfriend Adnan Syed is currently serving a life sentence for her murder. However, entirely due to the questions raised by the Serial podcast, Adnan Syed has been granted a retrial. So now is a good time to listen to Serial, or maybe even re-listen to it, and see what you think ahead of the retrial of Adnan Syed. Serial is compelling listening. The narration by Sarah Koenig, stitching together interviews and conversations with dozens and dozens of witnesses, friends, family and others involved, totally draws you in. At the very least, if you haven't listened to Serial, hit the link on your screen and give the first episode a go. If you do, there's a pretty good chance you'll then binge on the next 11 episodes. That's Serial Season 1, and again, the link is on your screen. So Serial has a direct link to the next podcast you should check out, which is This American Life. It was the team from This American Life who created Serial. This American Life started as a weekly hour-long radio program back in 1995 and has been podcasted since 2006. Each episode takes a theme, usually a topical or quirky aspect of modern living, and brings it to life with 2 or 3 real-life stories. To give you a feel, I'm going to play the introduction and setup story to one episode of This American Life with the theme, Except for That One Thing.
When Mike and Sarah bought their house, they were in their 30s, been renters all their lives. Not married, no kids yet, but heading there.
We had saved some money for a down payment, and we used all of that. So we had no money to furnish the house with.
And we were 2 people who had been living like grad students, basically. So yeah, we moved in our futon and we moved in our...
They had a little table that they got from Mike's dad's garage. Their chairs were these plastic stacking deck chairs, and the ones from Kmart. They had 2 desks, and that was about it. So most of the house was empty. Most of the rooms had nothing in them. And so on the weekends, they would go looking for furniture. At first, they tried yard sales. And then they learned about estate sales, barn sales. They live in Maine. The thing that they wanted more than anything was to get a dining room table. If they had a dining room table, they could have friends over for dinner, and they really wanted that. But the problem was they never had enough money to win at these barn auctions. Somebody would always outbid them. And Mike says he was seeing a side of Sarah he had never seen before.
She turned into an absolute different person at these barn auctions. Like, they would handle her like a paddle.
Yeah.
And she would have to win, which is not good when you don't have any money.
Yeah, you give me a paddle, and I'm not going to sit there with it on my lap the whole time. And so then I would get a little wound up.
After this one time when she spent hundreds of dollars that they did not have on something that looked from the back of the room where they were sitting like it was kind of a table, but did not actually turn out to be a table, the 2 of them decided, okay, no more barn auctions. But Sarah was not done.
Well, then I discovered this little thing called eBay.
Now, this is like 1998, 1999. eBay is really new. They had just gone public. People like Sarah are calling on dial-up modems. And Sarah said that the first thing that she did when she got onto eBay was enter dining room table into the search box.
And then I was amazed because suddenly there are all these pictures of tables, and you can just get them. Today it seems kind of old hat, but back then it really was exciting.
So at first, bidding on eBay was a lot like the barn auctions. Sarah would bid on some piece of furniture and then ultimately did not have enough money to win. But she says that she was able to get a nice side table for $20. That gave her hope. And then one day,
the listing was round walnut table and 2 chairs. And I clicked on it, and the starting bid was it was like $10, but then the shipping was really low.
I remember seeing a picture of it. It was kind of fancier than something we might normally go for. And the chairs looked great. It looked like what grown-up people would put in their house.
Yeah.
Like if we can put that table in here, that's it. That's the beginning. You could kind of see like your kids sitting around that table someday.
So there's a brief bidding war, and Sarah wins the table. She remembers it costing $20. Mike remembers it as $40. But the moment she won, that she's totally clear on.
Are you kidding? On that front, I was elated. That felt great. It just felt like, wow, I could furnish our whole house for $400. I felt like suddenly, we've been looking in the wrong places. Like we've been going to these barn auctions, but people already know about that, but nobody knows about eBay yet. So yeah, I was really fired up about it.
So a couple of days pass, and one day Sarah goes out to the mailbox, and there's a package. It's a box, like half the size of a toaster.
Sort of like, what's this? I brought it inside, and I came into the kitchen, and I opened up the box, and there was my walnut table and 2 chairs, and it was just as beautiful as it had been in the picture, but it was about 2.5 inches high. But it had like the little velvet cushions, and it had a crochet top on it. And it was from some guy like in Maryland who makes doll furniture. And I sat and I stared at it dumbfounded for so long, like trying to decide how I felt. That was the first thing when I was staring at the doll table. It was one of those do I laugh or do I cry moments.
Uh-huh.
And then I do remember getting back on eBay and realizing that when you put in a general search term, there's still categories, because I went and found the listing and it was under doll furniture.
Next, she showed it to Mike, and Mike says that when she showed him the toy table, at first he couldn't even understand what it was that he was looking at. Like his brain could not process the information. Like, what is this?
But then we were like, okay, that's fine. So we set it up in the dining room. So we had this big empty house and this tiny doll table with doll chairs set up in the dining room. And our friends started buying us little, doll dishes and glasses.
So it was a perfect transaction, except for that one thing.
Yeah, until the cardboard box arrived.
I do remember wanting Mike to see what a beautiful table it was, even if it was the wrong size. That didn't matter. It was a nice table. And I remember when our friends came over and they would all mock me, it really was important to me that they saw, it was a beautiful, the guy who made it is an artist. I'm going to give him that. And, it was walnut, and it was hand carved, and it had a nice little rim around it. And it was a miniature version of exactly what I wanted.
But today on our radio program, except for that one thing, we have stories today where everything is just like you would dream, right? Just like you would wish for, except for one pesky detail, one flaw. And the people involved, they have to decide if they can live with that flaw, that one problem in how things worked out, or if they cannot live with it. That's what growing up is about, right? Living with things not being absolutely perfect. Am I just talking for myself here? Hope not. Okay. From WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life, distributed by Public Radio International. I'm Ira Glass. Stay with us.
Okay, so if you'd like to check out more of This American Life, the link is on your screen. On to podcast number 3, Stuff You Should Know, a podcast which tries to answer in a non-technical, plain English way and with a good dose of humour the stuff you should know. Stuff like how the placebo effect works, how stem cells work, how x-rays work, or poison ivy or perfume, through to more abstract things like What's the story with Stonehenge or Easter Island, Evel Knievel, and even Monty Python? There's hundreds of episodes, so whether you subscribe or just run down the list and pick off the subjects that interest you, you'll have plenty of entertaining listening that's also pretty informative. Stuff You Should Know has millions of downloads each episode and has pretty much always been on iTunes' top 10 podcast rankings. So check it out, subscribe, and sample a few episodes using the link on your screen. Podcast number 4 is The Tim Ferriss Show. This is often ranked as the number 1 business podcast on iTunes and has had over 100 million downloads across the episodes. But I don't think of The Tim Ferriss Show as a business podcast. Tim Ferriss has become something of the king of self-help or self-motivational podcasting. He lives in San Francisco, near Silicon Valley, and his podcasts have a contemporary startup vibe to them. Most episodes are long conversational interviews, often close to 2 hours, with a cross-section of successful, usually self-made people, including a decent smattering of Silicon Valley billionaires like PayPal founder Peter Thiel. Interestingly, all interviewees have final cut on their episode, and this really does seem to get people to open up a whole lot more than they might do in conventional interviews. In fact, Tim Ferriss deploys a number of disarming tactics to break interviewees out of giving their standard talking points answers. Tim Ferriss, who is the author of the best-selling 4-Hour Workweek, is all about exploring the tricks and hacks successful people used to get where they are and usually continue to use. Anyhow, if it's a podcast that's had over 100 million downloads, that's probably as good a reason as any to at least check out The Tim Ferriss Show. Last podcast this episode for your must-have or at least must-check-out list is Freakonomics Radio. It's a podcast that's been around for years with hundreds of episodes, and it says it explores the, quote, hidden side of everything. Now, what this often means is the things you thought were true or common sense are actually the opposite when you look at the numbers. For example, the episode on Do Boycotts Actually Work? Or the episode on What You Don't Know About Online Dating. Some episodes are not so much about upending perceptions, but explaining the reasons why behind odd phenomena, like the episode on why there's been a boom in online mattress stores. And if you listen to podcasts, you'll know about that. Casper, a heavy podcast advertiser, became a $100 million company in less than 2 years. Each episode of Freakonomics runs between 30 to 50 minutes, so it's a fairly easy and entertaining listen. Definitely check it out if you haven't already, using the link on your screen. So that's it. 5 podcasts you should know about if you didn't already. And of course, there's this podcast, the 5-Minute Podcast Review. So subscribe now, check out the past episodes for many more podcasts, and tell any other podcast listeners you know to subscribe as well. See you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.